Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes renting fast if you're the car chick. Now, here she is.
Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting episode of The Straight Shift. If you have been following me for any amount of time, you probably know that one of my biggest pet peeves is bad drivers. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about a lack of skill. I don't expect the average person to have developed the same level of car control skills that I've learned as a race car driver on the track. Unfortunately, the opportunities to learn those advanced driving skills are not available to everyone. They can be very expensive. Not everybody has the right car. But what I'm talking about is distracted driving. That is the single worst problem that we have on the road today. In fact, every year, over 3,000 people in the US are killed and almost 500,000 are injured in car accidents that involve distracted drivers. Now, this is according to an official government website called distraction.gov. Yes, the government created a website called distraction.gov. That's how bad this problem is. And distracted driving is defined as any activity that could divert a person's attention away from the primary task of driving. And unfortunately, that can include just about everything. We think of distracted driving as texting while driving or talking on the phone while driving. And those are some of the top things. But, even talking on your Bluetooth headset or through the Bluetooth through the phone, that can distract you because you are focusing on the conversation you're having with the person on the other end as opposed to what's going on the road around you. That can be true if you've got passengers in the car with you that you're talking to them. It can be singing along to the radio and jamming to your tunes and having so much fun that you're caught up in the music and not paying attention to what's going on around you. It can be trying to mess with your navigation system, which fortunately a lot of systems don't let you mess with them while the car is in drive, but a lot of them do. Even so much as looking down to adjust your radio or to change the tunes on your iPod that's connected to your car or the music that's stored in the hard drive of the car's entertainment system. It can be eating and drinking in the car. And God forbid, and probably my favorite, are the idiots that actually, do things like shave and put on their makeup while they're driving to work in the mornings. These are all things that distract us from the primary task of driving. And you know that the number one thing that I preach is that when you are in your car, behind the wheel, in the driver's seat, the single most important and number one thing that 99.9% of your brain cells need to be devoted to is driving. But let's face it, we have all been distracted. We're human. We make mistakes. And at some point, there's something going on that is going to take us away from that primary focus. And as a result, the automakers have started putting into their vehicles this safety technology. They call them active driver aids. And a lot of my clients have been asking me about this. They started really rolling these technologies out to all the cars on the market, not just your, super fancy Mercedes and Lexus, but into Toyota and Nissan and Ford. They really hit that hard in 2016. That was a model year where we saw a huge revamp of nearly every make and model on the market as all the manufacturers integrated these driver aid technologies into their lineups pretty much across the board. And so they are now the number one most requested and top priority features that most car buyers want in cars today. And a lot of my clients have been asking me, okay, I've heard of these things, I've kind of seen them, I think I want them, but really, what are they? What are all the different options? And how do they work and how do they not work? Because I think that's an important thing to talk about, the limitations of these technologies and why you cannot rely on the technology to keep you safe on the road. That's your job as a driver. So today I want to talk a little bit about what some of these technologies are, And then we'll also talk about what are all the different ways that they can fail and go wrong. And when they do, what is the liability there? Who pays for that? How is this affecting the insurance industry, the legal landscape? Is just the technology, as usual, is tends to outpace a lot of our other social infrastructure. And so these are the things that are really starting to make a lot of headlines now, especially since these are the building block technologies that have enabled the self-driving car projects. And we talked about that in the last episode, the pedestrian that was killed by a self-driving car. It's why these technologies are so important and why we can't necessarily rely on them. So probably the one that came out first and that most people know about is the desperately needed backup camera. In fact, a couple years ago, it became required for all SUVs and trucks on the market. The government actually passed it into law for these larger vehicles to have those so that kids don't get run over because you're backing up in the grocery store parking lot and a child kind of darts behind the car, and because the car's higher, it's harder to see them, etc. So that's why the backup cameras have become a required safety technology on the larger vehicles, and the manufacturers for the most part just went and put them in nearly all of their vehicles anyway. So you don't have to be driving a Suburban to have a backup camera. They actually have them in smart cars. Now, granted, my argument is if you need a backup camera in something like a smart car, then perhaps you should consider something like a bicycle or maybe taking the bus. But, I really felt strongly that way until a couple years ago, I had a rental car, and it was just a little Honda Civic, and it had a backup camera. And I thought, I do not need a backup camera in a Honda Civic. But let me tell you, we have to parallel park in the neighborhood where I live, and having that rear view camera really makes parallel parking so much easier because you can see when your tires are getting close to the curb and when it's time to crank the wheel. And my recommendation for backup cameras is that you don't rely on it solely. Treat it as a fourth mirror. You've got your regular rear view mirror up top, that you use to check your makeup in, or shave. And you got your side view mirrors. And then this rear view camera is kind of your low view rear camera. So if you use it as a fourth mirror in conjunction with the other three, it's a really effective tool. But don't just rely on it solely. I know the newer ones are getting fancier and they're wider views now, and a lot of them have cross traffic alerts so that, if you're watching the backup camera, but, if you're like me and you drive a small car and you're invariably between two SUVs at the Walmart parking lot, you kind of inch back, trying to back up really slowly because anybody could be coming up, flying up the aisle in the parking lot. And the backup cameras that have the cross traffic alert system have some sensors, and they can detect that vehicle coming, and they'll beep at you to say, hey, stop, somebody's coming. And that can be really helpful. But again, you don't want to rely on it 100%. Now, kind of the next evolution of the backup camera is some manufacturers have implemented a 360-degree view camera system. So you can not only see what's behind you, but you can see literally everything around you. I have bought cars. Nissan was one of the first ones to come out with this. They started it on the Infiniti line, their luxury cars, but it's now on a lot of the regular Nissan vehicles, especially like your Pathfinder and some of the bigger SUVs. And I've had several clients specifically request they wanted a vehicle that had this because, frankly, they're just not very good at parking. They know this, they admit this, or they have a very tight parking situation. Parking, I don't know who designs parking decks for big cities, but they design the parking spaces to be about 3 inches wider and 1 inch longer than the average vehicle. So it's really tight, and having that 360 camera system can make it a lot easier for you to see the exact edges of your car to try and squeeze in and out of these tight parking spaces. I have spent years learning exactly where all four corners of my car are located. And again, that's, partly something from paying attention, partly something that you learn on the racetrack. For car control, you really have to know where every single piece of your car is in relation to anything around you. But those 360 cameras can be really, really helpful for that. And we're starting to see them proliferate more through the other manufacturers, but Nissan was one of the big ones to implement that, and that's actually pretty cool. I don't have a problem with that. But the rest of these start getting into what I call electronic babysitters. They are taking over our ability to drive the car, and they're taking responsibility for paying attention to what's going on around us, because the manufacturers apparently have decided that we're not going to be getting any better as drivers. We're not going to be getting any less distracted. So they're at least going to implement these technologies to try and keep us a lot safer on the roads, because we're apparently not going to do it ourselves. And so one of the ones that probably bothers me the most, and it's one that's very popular, and it was kind of the next piece of safety technology to hit the market, and that's blind spot monitoring. This is a system that there's little sensors that kind of look on either side of your car. Honda's, for some reason, has only been on the passenger side, not the driver's side, which is a little bit weird, but they figure you're on the driver's side, you should be paying attention. But most manufacturers, it's on both sides of the car. And, the vehicle kind of has little cameras and little sensors that look to see if there's a vehicle in your, quote, blind spot. It will flash something in your side view mirror, or it might beep audibly. They all work a little bit differently, but it will do something to try and notify you, hey, there's somebody in your blind spot. Don't change lanes yet. Well, here's the thing that kind of irritates me about that. I don't have a problem with the technology. It doesn't always work when, say, somebody in the lane, not the lane next to you, but the lane further one over, moves into that lane. Invariably it happens, right? You're trying to, move into the lane, and the guy on the far side is also trying to move into that lane. And if you're not paying attention, and especially when people don't use their turn signals, which is just a whole nother rant, you don't necessarily, realize, oh, you're both trying to occupy the same space at the same time. Sometimes the blind spot monitoring system will catch that. Sometimes it won't. But here's my thing. Why do you have a blind spot in the first place? Well, that's because most driving schools teach you to set your mirrors the wrong way. If you set your side mirrors properly, you should not have blind spots. Now, there are a few vehicles that are an exception, things like the FJ Cruiser from Toyota, which you can't see out of no matter what, bigger vehicles, bigger trucks, but they tend to have bigger side view mirrors with special blind spot mirrors built into them to negate that. But if you set your mirrors correctly, you will not have any blind spots. How do you do that? That is best explained in a video. So you can go to howtosetyourmirrors.com, and that will send you to a video that I did that shows you exactly how to set your mirrors properly so that you don't have any blind spots. So if you don't have blind spot monitoring in your car, don't worry about it. Or even if you do, set your mirrors properly and you won't have to worry about it. We are going to take just a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about lane departure systems, active cruise control, and one of the most important, the emergency braking and collision avoidance systems. We'll be right back. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of, or about finding the right car at a fair price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 888-575-2138. That's 888-575-2138. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
Where the rubber meets the road.
Nice to meet you. Love your asphalt.
Hey, nice treads.
It's Straight Shift with the Car Chick.
Welcome back to The Straight Shift. Today we are talking about the electronic driver aid or driver assist technologies that are so popular in cars today. I call them electronic babysitters because they're making us worse drivers, not better drivers, but the goal is for the technology to kind of make up for our idiot human factor. And when we are distracted, to at least try and help us not wreck out there. So we talked about rear view cameras and blind spot monitoring systems. One of the next technologies are the lane departure warning and the lane keeping systems. And those kind of take the whole blind spot monitoring to the next level. And, if you kind of start to drift out of your lane, if you're not paying attention, sometimes you're looking, rubbernecking at the accident on the other side of the freeway, or you're looking at the Christmas lights, where you're looking is where the car goes because your hands kind of naturally follow where your eyes are. So if you're looking at something off the side of the road, usually what happens is your car starts to drift in that direction, and you'll see people who aren't paying attention. And they're kind of wandering around in their lane. They'll kind of drift over the dotted line. I'm sure this technology is going to be really popular with drunk drivers and people who work third shift and are exhausted on their way home. But the vehicle's lane keeping system sometimes it will just warn you, and it might beep. It might actually vibrate the driver's seat. It's like, whoo, that would kind of wake me up. Or, it may actually go the step further, and the car will actually take control of the wheel and put you back in your lane. I think that is a little bit too intrusive, because there are times when I actually will intentionally move my car over, not over the line, but to the edge of my lane so that I can see what's going on further down the freeway, especially if there's a lot of stop and go traffic. I drive a little tiny car. I drive a Mini, so I can't see over squat on the highway. I am one of the smallest cars out there, and I'm constantly having to try and kind of sneak peeks around the sides of the big SUVs and the trucks. And I don't want the car going, nope, not going to let you do that, and pushing me back into my lane. So I think that might be taking it a little bit too far. But fortunately, for people like me that don't want that level of intrusiveness, a nice little beep or a warning or whatever might be fine, but I don't want the car taking control away from me. Those systems can be disabled, probably 10 menus into the infotainment system, but you can control that. Now the lane change assist part is not as bad. It's a little more like blind spot monitoring. It just kind of looks, and sometimes people are nervous about changing lanes in heavy traffic. If you've ever driven in New York or LA, you'll totally know what I'm talking about. And so the lane change assist will monitor the traffic conditions around you. It can even monitor relative speeds of cars, and it can tell you when it thinks it's safe for you to go ahead and change lanes. Do I trust the car's judgment on that? I don't know, but I'm not intimidated to change lanes either because of my driving style. But that is a technology out there for drivers that might be a little less confident in their driving skills, or, in their car's ability to accelerate and get into that other lane when they're in heavy traffic. So that's kind of how the lane change assist and the lane departure warnings and lane keeping systems work. Another one that's been really popular is the active cruise control. Now, cruise control itself, just the basic one, that we've been using on the highway, that's been around since the 60s, which is pretty amazing. And, now the adaptive cruise control, the way that works is it uses either kind of a radar or LiDAR system, depending on the technology the manufacturer chose. And you can set the cruise control to follow a certain distance from the car in front of you. It's usually measured in how many seconds or minutes or whatever. And then the car will monitor the car in front of you and adjust your speeding up or slowing down to keep you that kind of same distance from the car in front of you. And I kind of have a problem with that. You can tell I have a problem with a lot of these, but what I don't like about active cruise control is that, first of all, you're relying on somebody else's driving skills to determine what your car does. That's always a bad idea, because, when I go crazy on the freeway, people aren't very good about maintaining a proper speed, and they speed up and slow down a ton, and that drives me crazy. When I'm on the freeway, I want to go a consistent speed, and so the person in front of me, is speeding up, slowing down, I'm usually going to find an opportunity to safely pass and just kind of get around him and get into my own space. So, also, what if what if he suddenly slams on his brakes because, a deer runs across the highway? Or what if somebody cuts in between you? Because, that never happens on the freeway. Those are situations where the adaptive cruise control can fail. And, when the car is handling that for you, as a driver, you're much more likely to pay less attention to what's going on. And so your chances of being able to take control back from the car and slam on your brakes or do whatever you need to do to adapt to this new and sudden situation, those chances now go down and you're more likely to get into an accident. So I'm not a big fan of active cruise control. I would rather have just the regular cruise control and, I can tell it to speed up or slow down, if traffic is kind of moving in a slightly erratic way, or usually that's the point where I get frustrated and give up and turn the dang cruise control off in the first place. So, but I don't want, the car in front of me to dictate what my car does. That's no, not going to happen. So, so be aware, if you have active cruise, still be aware that there are things that can happen, especially if another car darts between you and the car in front of you. The adaptive cruise control system in your particular vehicle may or may not be able to adapt to that sudden situation, and you're still going to have to really quickly take control of the car so that you don't get into an accident. And that leads into the last one, and this is probably the most important and the one that I no longer mind having in cars, and that is the emergency braking. Some vehicles have a system where they will just warn you. Most of them now, what they'll do is when the vehicle senses that, you're kind of getting too close to that car in front of you, that car's slowing down and you haven't noticed yet, it'll start beeping at you and start beeping at you more and more erratically and, trying to get your attention so that you can hit the brakes. And then if it detects, nope, person's not going to hit the brakes in time, the vehicle will actually engage the braking system to stop the car. When I got rear-ended in Maggie a few years ago, I really kind of would have liked for the woman in the Corolla behind me to have had that, because she's like, oh, I didn't see you there. Really? You didn't see the bright pink Mini Cooper, the 5 cars in front of me, and the big freaking red light up there? Really? That's because you weren't looking out your windshield. So, that system could potentially have saved me. Now, it might not have, because it was raining that day. So stopping distances are dramatically increased when the road is wet or snowy or slippery in some way. Another thing that I don't trust these systems to take into account is also the condition of the brakes and tires on your car. Because, the computer's determining, how much distance it needs to stop the car based on your velocity. But your velocity is not the only factor. It's not just how fast you're going and what the distance is between you and the object. Those are not the only variables in the equation. One of the most important things that affects the stopping ability of your car is your tires. And so, these systems, they kind of assume that you have the original equipment tire for that car. And a lot of people don't put the same kind of tire on their car when it's time to replace the tires. They think, oh, those are expensive. And so they buy the cheap Chinese, stuff that the tire company recommended and to save money. Well, now you've got a cheap, crappy tire on your car that you may take literally twice as long to stop as your good tires that came on the car from the factory. Even if the tires are brand spanking new and the road is dry as a desert, those tires, because they are of lower quality design, they will still take longer to stop your car than, maybe a brand new nice set of Michelins or, whatever came on your car from the factory. So I don't trust those systems to be able to account for all of the variables required to determine whether or not, the car is going to stop in time. And so this is your job as a driver. So when there's so many other things that can make these systems fail, all the sensors that they rely on, those are sensors. And what happens if your car is super dirty because you live up north in the snow and there's just no way to keep your car, completely clean when it's snowy and yucky out there? ice can form over the lens of some of these cameras or the LiDAR system. Their weather can be a big factor. What if it's foggy? How well do these systems work in the dark? A lot of them are doing pretty well on the night vision, but they're not perfect. Obviously, the woman that was killed, last month in Arizona by the autonomous car, that was at night. Why did the system not see her? So there's just so many different factors, and reasons that these systems can fail. And when they do, who's responsible? Who pays? And believe me, the insurance companies have been looking at this stuff very seriously for several years now. When these technologies first started coming out, and the insurance companies were aware of what the manufacturers were developing, so it's not like they were blindsided by this, but there's still only a limited amount of empirical data of these technologies actually being on the roads, and have they really kept us safer? And the answer to that is we just don't know yet. There's not enough data to be able to draw good conclusions yet, but they are studying this. But what is fairly clear and agreed upon in the industry is who is at fault. And that would be you as the driver. It is broadly recognized in the automotive industry, in the insurance industry, and in the legal industry that the driver of the car is responsible for that car and what it does when you're behind the wheel. So that means, if you are using these driver aid technologies and you still rear end someone because you didn't brake in time, you say, it's not my fault. The system didn't brake in time. No, it's still your fault. That's why these systems are called driver aids, driver assist. The manufacturers chose those terms very specifically because they want to make it very clear, both to you as a driver from a safety standpoint, and to cover their own butts legally, that these are merely to assist the driver, and it is the driver's responsibility ultimately to control the car. That is in all of the documentation for these things. It is in your owner's manual if you have a car with these technologies. Therefore, it is your responsibility. If you are in an accident, you do not get to blame the car. And, we have a legal framework for that because, sometimes, does the car fail? Oh, well, I hit my brakes and the car didn't stop. This is not new to the legal industry. People have made these arguments that it was the car's fault. Toyota was, very aware of this. I don't know if you remember, several years ago, there was the whole debacle with the unanticipated acceleration with the Prius. My thoughts on that were, it's a Prius. Any amount of acceleration is going to be unanticipated. But, people were saying that, oh, the car accelerated suddenly on its own and caused me to hit that guy. It wasn't my fault. Well, that actually, there was some truth to that. The problem was the floor mats had not been laser cut properly to fit the car, and the floor mats were getting caught on the accelerator, and it was causing the accelerator to get stuck. So, we have seen situations where it was partially the car's fault, and, Toyota has had to pay a bit of money about that. And we have a legal system that is able to make those arguments and analyze those situations and make determinations in that situation. But the bottom line is, no matter how many of these driver safety aids, these technological electronic babysitters and nannies that we put in our vehicles, the ultimate responsibility for safe driving is on the driver. I will say this until I'm blue in the face. The single most important safety feature on any car is the person behind the wheel. So I hope that everybody, has learned something today from, talking about these technologies and what technologies are out there. They are available in almost every make and model now on the market. Sometimes you do have to pay for a higher trim level or pay for a special package like a driver assist package to get these technologies. So they are a little bit more expensive. Toyota is one of the manufacturers that has implemented it. It is standard on every vehicle they make. Even their base model Corolla has at least a minimum of these technologies. I don't know if that's Toyota saying we as a manufacturer are committed to safety, or we've just completely given up on drivers. You guys are never going to get any better, so we're at least going to cover our own butts. But the technology is available. if you want to take advantage of these, they can be really good for people who are not as assertive, they're not as confident in their driving skills, and maybe, taking some advanced driver training classes just isn't realistic. Or they're really popular with a lot of my older clients who recognize, I'm just not as quick as I used to be. My reactions aren't as fast. My vision's not as crisp. My hearing's not as good. And I feel safer, and I feel it's my responsibility, since I'm going to keep driving, obviously, to be safer for the other people on the road that I'm out there with. And I deeply respect the people that make that decision and recognize that, hey, I'm getting older. It happens to the best of us. My reactions aren't as quick. So I want these technologies as a backup system to me, but they still take responsibility for their own driving. So if you guys have any questions about the driver aids, you're interested in getting a car, maybe has one, you can always give me a call. You can visit me on the web at thecarchick.com. And in the meantime, folks, whether you have these technologies in your car or not, please drive safely out there. I'm out of here.
The Straight Shift Podcast is copyright Leanne Shattuck, The Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of Leanne Shattuck or The Car Chick.